Hey guys, what's happening? It is Wednesday, May 13th. I was hoping to get something out yesterday, but it would not stop. It was just incessant all day long. The phone wouldn't leave my ear. In fact, there's popping an ear pod out because I just literally hung up something. So, see if I can get you some data here to look at. Um, One thing I wanted to hit on again, I've had a few calls where a question had come up and we're talking about rates where folks had said, hey, I got X rate with no points back in February. Why can't I get that? Things have changed. Go back and look at the videos we were putting up before. The servicing side of the business is no longer buying the servicing side, rights of the loan. So anybody who has closed on a loan before, and then when about a month goes by, you're going to get a letter from a servicing company, like and it may even be one of the big banks. Somebody else is going to service that loan. They got a big department with people sitting in there at phones and computers, ensuring your payment is collected, then is properly distributed. You got the principal and interest paid directly to all those who in line who are taking a piece of that, down to the mortgage-backed securities pools and the pension fund that put their money up for that. You've got the insurance being collected so that once a year they can pay your insurance policy. You get your taxes being collected for those that are impounded. That way they can pay your taxes when they come due, whether it be twice a year or once a year, depending upon your environment. They traditionally would pay 1% of the loan size to get the rights to service that loan. So what is in it for them? They would get to collect 30 basis points every year to put in their pocket, right? That servicing company, massive organization with people and overhead and computers and technology and taxes and all these expenses they've got, right? And they're going to pay on $100,000 transaction about $1,000 a month they would pay on $100,000 a transaction, $100,000 loan. Let's just go backwards there, call it what it is. $100,000 loan, they'd pay about $1,000 to get the right to collect those payments, right? Well, what they're going to keep every year traditionally was about 30 basis points or $300 a year. So as we can do the math on that, it would take about 4 years to make up the cost, just the $1,000 they spent plus that little bit of overhead. They won't break even till about 4 years. And then what has happened recently in these last few months, people refinancing every couple years, allowing the time to go by for them to collect enough money to even pay themselves back what they spent to get the right to collect on those loans. So there's billions being lost. So when all this mess happened, the servicing side of the mortgage industry went to Wall Street and basically said, we're not buying the loans anymore. Don't expect us to give you that $1,000. And we know you're not equipped to service it. So since we are all equipped to do this, and we're not going to take this on anymore, here's what we need. We need to, one, you're going to give us a loan, and then you're going to pay us to take them. So there's a big gap there. It used to be they'd receive $1,000. Now they're actually paying to have those servicing companies take on that role. So that being the case, you're going to still see rates in pretty good rates, but they're going to charge you up front for it. They got to bridge that gap. And it looked like there was probably a discussion that went on or some sort of form to look at and say, well, we can always just bump the rates up to cover that cost. But then what do? We continue to just make that cycle happen where when the rates go down, you're going to refi. It just perpetuates the problem. So now how it is get the same rates they can get you, but then there's going to be a little cost up front. And then the cost benefit later to try and refinance just for rates not there. So that at least that's how I believe they're working it, and we'll see how that plays out. So just know there's going to be points, especially if you're 20% down people and you're 15% down people. The 25, I'm not seeing it as much. In fact, very minimal. So we want to have a discussion. So don't freak out when you see points. Just know that's a part of life now. So some interesting data has come out. The February's numbers have been produced from CoreLogic on delinquencies, which I think is kind of an interesting thing to put out there, kind of as a baseline of what was going on before the COVID crisis happened, before we had this COVID interrupt, right? The whole global interrupt on this change to how we do business, the change to how we interact with other people. So foreclosures were at 0.4%, 0.4%. So it's like 1 out of every 400 homes potentially was facing foreclosure. Serious delinquency, meaning over 90 days late, was 1.2% of all the mortgages out there. and 30 days late was 3.6% of all the mortgages. So that was prior to all this. That was February numbers. That was the end of February. And we know all this started happening about March 9th when everything started to really freak out. So we're going to get those numbers soon, well, not soon, in a month, and we'll be able to say, okay, here's what it looks like after that. It's going to progress to see how this has all been affected. So it's going to be interesting to see how that all plays out. Another thing that we get to look at is inflation. I talk a lot about inflation. We noticed that inflation, all the job losses, costs coming down, so so we've seen that take a look at a chart here that I've got that was produced by Shadow Stats, and you can go to shadowstats.com. But and what we're looking at with this is you can actually go back when you subscribe to Shadow Stats. You can look all the way back at what the Fed's inflation. So if we look at the top of this chart. And this is just something they produced, and I was able to put it into an Excel spreadsheet. It goes all back to 1970. And you look at what the Fed's, the CPI numbers were at 6.8%. And then what, Shadow Stats looks back up there, that was the true inflation back then because of how they were measuring it. But then they continued to change how they measured it as you went on. So we go from 1970 all the way to today. So what we've been talking about in the past, anybody who's listening to me talk about inflation, you'll see in the previous conversations I've had about it, we're figuring inflation based upon the information we got from Shadow Stats between 9 and 10%, somewhere there. Well, look here. If you look back earlier in 2020, January, February, March, you see inflation numbers from the Fed. January of this year was 2.4% using the CPIU. You've got February is 2.33%. March, went way down to 1.54%. Now they're saying it's 0.33%. Huge changes. But if you look back at Shadow Stats, when they add in the things the Fed's not looking at, right? Energy costs, food costs, other volatile things that are a way of life for people, where they're spending their money. The cost of lattes going up, right? Well, look at the toilet paper index right now, right? We've referenced that a few times. You look back in January, it was 10.26% was the average inflation across the United States for cost of living. You get to February, it's 10.09, March 9.24, April 7.93. So we're seeing a pretty good decline, just like what we were showing on the Fed side. When you look at the real cost of living, you're seeing a little bit, you're still seeing a little bit of a skewed number there. So what I like to look at when I'm talking about inflation is, I may have hit on this with many of you, is what is the real cost of money today for a 30-year fixed, thinking about the inflation. I've always used 7% as an average inflation number to play with. So we're going to use that same thing here, and we're going to talk, let's just say we're just going to estimate 4.5%. It doesn't mean that's what the rates are. I've seen rates lower, but let's just going to go with that number right now. I'm going to go with a 30-year fixed loan. If my computer will work for me. And then we're going to do a $100,000 loan with $80,000 $100,000 price with an $80,000 loan amount. So, and we're going to factor this at a 7% inflation, still tame compared to what we're seeing even from Shadow Stats. So principal and interest. So the principal is going to be about $80,000 paid back over 30 years. Interest over 30 years is $65,925.37. Well, we're going to show a payment. Total principal and interest over 30 years of $145,925.37. That right there is a big number. Most people are like, hey, I don't want to do 30 years. That's a lot of interest I'm going to pay. That's the compound interest kicking my butt. That's Einstein said compound interest is the eighth wonder of the world, and here are you getting your ass kicked by it with this interest being charged for over 30 years. But when we factored in the value of the dollar, and the fact that the dollar is changing its value all the time because of inflation, it's losing its buying power. Well, if we factor that at 7%, and we recalculate every dollar right here in this column, every dollar that leaves your hands to make a payment on that loan for the next 30 years. And we recalculate against the value of the dollar the day you borrowed the money, right? 30 years ago, you're not paying back 80,000. You're not paying the $65,000 in interest. You're definitely not paying the 145,925. You're paying 60,926.91. $60,000, or basically 61 grand. That's what you're paying back. Think about that. Because the lender is willing to accept the same dollar amount for 30 years while you get to raise rents to pace inflation. We'll talk about that in the future, about raising rents and what's going on there. You're not giving them back what you even borrowed. It's a pretty amazing thing to consider, that when you leverage high and leverage long and pay off slow, you never even pay back the full principal. So that's something that's the most powerful part of buying investment real estate. The ability to leverage high, leverage long is a real big deal, especially in an inflationary environment. Now, it was called the eighth wonder of the world, right, by Einstein, because of how he looked at it. But he was not looking at it with a long-term instrument like this in an inflationary environment. So consider those things, that this is hundreds of % return on your investment. And just to kind of give you a little bit further information on the value of the dollar, when you go into the shadow stats, when you have access to this part and you pay to get into shadow stats, John Williams put together this technology. We look at the value of a dollar over 30 years. So if you go back to April of 1990, if you just bought a home 30 years ago and you're paying it off for the full 30 years, the value of $100 in April is equal to $8.44 back in 1990. How crazy is that? I remember 1990. I was in high school. I started my sophomore year, and if $100 bought that much back then, we'll flip flop this just so you can see how that works as far as the value the other direction, just to kind of get a feel for the inverse version of the value of the dollar. So we go back to $100 back in 1990 is basically, it would take $11,844.73 today to equal the same buying power of $100 30 years ago. Now that's based upon their inflation calculator, based upon today's 7 point whatever percent that was on the other chart. So real interesting stuff to consider when you're looking at long-term instruments like a 30-year fixed. So something to consider as you're buying the property, and as you're thinking of, do I do a 15-year, a 20-year, a 30-year? 30 is awesome. As we see, this is what the dollar is doing over that period of time. And then last little thing to consider, actually, it's really not even something to consider. I did notice a few people had put some reviews up about the books on Amazon. I appreciate you taking the time. Thank you. There's been a few of them out there that did that. Quite a few people have purchased. I appreciate that. Once those royalty checks come in, we'll get those off to those charities. I want to be able to report that back to you. I did notice somebody being very, very honest on their review, and they gave me 3 stars, which is awesome. Thank you for being honest about that. There's been some 5 stars in there. I'd really love to know what it would take to go from 3 to 5. So if you're watching here and you're the person who said, hey, I read these things and there are 3, whatever it is, I'd love to know what it is. There's certain things I can't change. I can't change the redneck who's on the cover. It's always going to be that guy, right? There's something about the content that I missed. I'd love to know what it is, because there's more coming. I've got 3 more with my editor right now. We haven't published them yet. I'm looking to have about 13. So if there's anything that you believe that I could do to be better at what I'm doing, please shoot that off to me. I'd love to be able to continue to enhance what that is and become better myself. I don't take criticism as a hit to my gut. I take that as, where can Aaron be better? And so thank you very much for watching, for taking the time to pick up the books, for going to Amazon and making that review happen. I really appreciate that. And we'll just get you guys some more data as we come down further into the week. Thank you all.